A sudden rustling in the dense thicket breaks the early morning silence of Montana's rugged wilderness. In that fleeting moment, something monumental occurs, an encounter that will change lives forever. Buried within the heart of these forests lies a story of a terrified bear, an exhausted hunter, and an unexpected alliance forged in the face of danger. Yet this is no ordinary wilderness tale. It's a gripping saga that unveils the power of empathy, the resilience of nature, and the hidden threads that connect every living being. Keep watching to witness a breathtaking struggle and the unforgettable turn of events that nobody saw coming. The morning light crept over the towering pines that surrounded the scenic region of Glacier National Park, gilding the edges of each needle in a pale, golden hue. The crisp air felt almost electric, charged with the hush of anticipation that settled over the landscape. Deer stepped gingerly through the underbrush, ears swiveling for any hint of danger, while ravens circled high above, uttering low calls that echoed through the canyons. Everything seemed poised on the edge of something significant. Unknown to the forest's silent spectators, a frightened bear named Cassius, unusually massive yet remarkably cautious, found himself ensnared in a dire predicament. He had ventured too close to a remote hunting camp, drawn by the lingering scent of cooking fires and human presence. Perhaps it was curiosity or simply desperation for an easy meal, but now he hovered dangerously on the brink between survival and tragedy. Roughly half a mile away, a small group of hunters readied their gear, oblivious to the drama unfolding just beyond their range of sight. One among them, a man named Everett Wilson, known for his unwavering calm, had seen more of these woods than many in the group combined. He had grown up near the border of Glacier National Park, roaming the trails, swimming in the chilly lakes, absorbing the rhythms of the wild. For years, Everett had understood the unspoken rules of coexistence between humans and wildlife, the delicate balance that commanded respect if one were to survive, let alone thrive, in these rugged realms. But that chilly morning, as sunbeams threaded through the high treetops, Everett's role would transform in ways he never could have imagined. The hunters wore thick boots that crunched over brittle leaves and broken twigs. They scanned the area for clues: a bent branch, a muddy paw print, a freshly scratched trunk. Their journey had begun before dawn, cold and purposeful, with hearts set on filling their tags. Each carried rifles slung across broad shoulders, the glint of metal a stark reminder that these men and women came prepared for an apex predator. Although they told stories around the campfire about the big one that got away, no one expected a real confrontation with a bear so soon. Not here, not in such a secluded pocket of forest. Yet fate has a way of bringing together unlikely adversaries at the precise moment tension is about to boil over. Cassius sniffed the air, senses flaring with alarm. He had wandered from higher elevations where the pine-laden ridges provided a sanctuary. Over the past week, as the nights grew colder, pickings became slim, berries grew sparse, small animals hid deeper in dens, and Cassius realized that each day might bring the relentless winter closer. A faint glimmer of human scent smoke, cured meat, coffee grounds drifted through the conifers. Hungry and uncertain, he stepped closer, guided by instincts that told him to grab what sustenance he could before retreating. Instead, he found himself cornered between a steep rock face and the hunters who had unknowingly crept within range. A single rifle shot, even by accident, could trigger a deadly confrontation. Everett was the first to notice the fresh scratch marks on a nearby pine trunk. The bark lay in tatters, and deep grooves revealed a massive claw strike, one that suggested an unusually large bear. Crouching low, he laid a hand gently on the twisted remains of the bark, feeling how fresh the shavings were. Something pricked his gut. It felt like he was following footprints on the threshold of a moral dilemma. Was it right to pursue this creature that had just been trying to survive? Could he hold his ground while also honoring the wilderness that had shaped him? His immediate instincts urged caution. If the group was chasing a bear, they needed to be absolutely sure they could do so safely and humanely, or perhaps not at all. That silent shift in Everett's soul did not go unnoticed by his companions. A gruff hunter named Lyle approached, peering down at the claw marks. "Big one for sure," he muttered, sounding both excited and wary. "I'll bet it's the bear folks have been talking about all summer. They said it was huge, might have taken down a young moose by itself. We better brace ourselves." In Lyle's weather-beaten eyes, excitement mingled with apprehension. In these circles, snagging a bear with a trophy hide was a triumph told around campfires for decades, forging legends out of ordinary men. But even the most stubborn heart recognized how dangerous such hunts could be for both human and animal. As they pressed onward, the dense canopy overhead wove a tapestry of green and grey sunlight. Long fallen trunks littered the forest floor like bones of ancient creatures, giving cover to smaller critters, reptiles, and beetles that scurried in the hunter's wake. Each step forward carried an unspoken tension, as if some primal part of each human recognized the near-sacred presence they were pursuing. The forest, too, seemed to sense the tremor. Silence grew so thick it pressed in on ears. It was as though every living thing held its breath, waiting for the moment the men and women would cross an invisible threshold between caution and confrontation. In an unexpected turn, Cassius decided to circle back, perhaps spooked by a different scent or alarmed by the crack of distant voices. Retreating, he found himself near a craggy formation of boulders. The path behind him sloped into a narrow canyon, dense with alder and cottonwood, leading nowhere but deeper into a trap. He caught sight of the shifting silhouettes of humans through the branches. His muscles tensed. He made no noise, but an alert bristle ran along his massive shoulders. If these people continued forward, they would cross paths soon enough. Unwilling to provoke a battle, yet too large to vanish easily, Cassius was forced into a choice. Stand his ground or risk the uncertain route through the canyon. Either way, he sensed he was running out of time. Meanwhile, the rest of the hunting party was growing uneasy. They had tracked across uneven terrain, discovering more signs: a half-eaten fish near a creek, fresh scat steaming on moss. They exchanged glances that flickered with excitement. Hearts pounded from adrenaline as well as the natural fear every rational person feels at the thought of encountering a powerful bear. Yet no one was prepared for the velocity of what happened next. In one electrifying moment, Cassius burst into sight, his colossal frame weaving through the underbrush. The group froze. Rifles were raised, hearts hammered. The line between predator and prey blurred in a swirl of primal tension. Cassius stood on his hind legs, a towering figure of muscle and fur, brown-black coat shimmering in the dappled sunlight. His eyes were wide, reflecting both defiance and dread. A deep, rumbling growl erupted from his chest, echoing off the pines with a haunting resonance. Some of the hunters stepped back, fear cracking the veneer of bravado, yet instincts warred within Cassius. Fight or flee, a single shot could rip through the still morning air. Triggers itched under nervous fingers, but no one wanted to be the first to unleash chaos. In that trembling hush, it was Everett who began to step forward, lowering his rifle barrel until it pointed at the mossy ground. Time seemed to dilate as Everett's voice, barely above a whisper, reached the ears of his fellow hunters. "We should back off." His words clung to the hush, like the intangible hope of salvation. The tension coiled like a serpent around them, ready to strike at any moment. Lyle tensed at Everett's suggestion. "We can take him," he hissed. "We're prepared." But Everett knew that taking the bear could come at a high price. One uncertain shot, a wrong move, and Cassius might charge, injuring or killing someone, ensuring the bear's own death in the process. Nothing about this felt right. Cassius advanced a step, lips peeled back in a silent snarl. He was trapped, corners of his mind frantic, with only one objective: survive. In the swirling stew of confusion and fear, Everett thought of his family, his partner, who had always advocated for balance in nature, and his parents, who had taught him that hunting was a privilege to be practiced with the utmost reverence. To them, taking a life was never a trophy chase, it was sustenance, tradition, and deep respect. This situation, however, smacked of an impending tragedy that had no place in such teachings. For a fleeting moment, the entire forest felt suffused with an ineffable energy, as if the centuries-old trees bore witness to the standoff. As eyes locked, man and bear reached across the expanse of species and lifetimes. Whether it was an instinctual understanding or an inexplicable connection, Everett felt something shift inside him. He took one more step forward, placing himself between the rest of the hunters and the agitated bear. The forest around them seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Every molecule of air crackled with tension. "It's not worth it," Everett insisted, his tone calm but urgent. "We're intruders here." A few of the hunters exchanged puzzled, conflicted glances. Lyle spat on the ground in frustration. "We came this far. We can't just..." But he didn't finish. The sight of the bear, every inch of Cassius's hulking presence, made the prospect of a direct confrontation horrifyingly real. And in that raw, vivid moment, empathy took root. Nobody wanted a bloodbath. Perhaps pride tugged at them, but caution and compassion spoke louder. Everett slowly slipped the rifle from his shoulder, raising both hands, palms out, a universal signal of retreat. Cassius grunted, his sides heaving as he breathed. A standoff still, but less cataclysmic. Step by step, Everett began to move backward, never turning his back on the bear. The rest of the group, following suit, lowered their weapons. No instructions were spoken. Fear and respect coalesced into silent consent. Then, in a slow exhalation of tension, Cassius dropped to all fours. His immense paws churned the loose soil, but for the moment, he did not charge. A kind of unspoken understanding simmered in the air. Then a crack of a distant twig shattered the fragile piece. Lyle, startled, moved on reflex. His finger twitched against the trigger, sending a deafening report through the trees. The shot flew wide, but it ignited terror in the bear's eyes. Cassius sprang forward, issuing a mighty roar that reverberated up the spines of everyone present. Panic rippled through the group. Adrenaline hijacked reason, and for a horrifying second, the possibility of a mauling or a lethal bullet soared. Everett yelled something inaudible in the chaos and braced himself. Just then, Cassius's momentum seemed to falter, as though he recognized Everett's stance of non-aggression. Instead of driving full force into the group, Cassius barreled to the right, crashing into a thick knot of underbrush. Branches snapped, leaves scattered, and a thunderous roar trailed in his wake. The hunters, hearts hammering, watched in astonishment as the wounded-sounding bellows receded, leaving only the echo in their ears. When the crashing finally faded, an immense hush seized the forest. The men and women stood there, shaken to their bones, faces ashen, forming a tableau of bewilderment and relief. The bear had vanished. A tense argument erupted. Some insisted they follow Cassius to ensure he wasn't injured, while others feared that the bear, now enraged, would kill them on sight if they pursued him further. Everett's voice, firm and resonant, cut through their squabbling. "We let him be. We might have just dodged a tragedy." Eventually, they retreated, though an uneasy sense of guilt and awe lingered. The shot had not struck Cassius, but the entire dynamic had changed. A precarious line had been crossed, trust shattered. Would Cassius remain in the area, or would he forever fear humans, possibly acting out of aggression the next time? Night fell over Glacier National Park, casting long, eerie shadows against the slope of the mountains. As the hunters gathered around their campfire, the weight of the day's events hung heavily in the brisk night air. They exchanged stories, replayed every second of the bear confrontation. Flames danced on anxious faces, while the hiss and crackle of burning wood underscored the uneasy quiet among them. Everett, set apart, stared into the glowing embers, wrestling with a cascade of emotions. Part of him felt relief that no one was harmed, human or bear. Another part felt a strange kinship with Cassius, almost as if the bear had granted him a second chance, an opportunity to re-evaluate the boundaries between man and beast. Not far away, Cassius lurked among the towering pines, panting from the day's terror. His ears twitched at the campfire's soft roar, the occasional bursts of laughter or argument. His flanks still quivered with tension, a residue of adrenaline that refused to settle. Whether bears experience emotions akin to humans is a debate among scientists and philosophers, but on a primal level, Cassius felt the weight of that threat. Instinct told him to remain hidden, to press deeper into the heart of the forest at dawn. Yet something also made him linger, observing from a distance the strange beings who had spared his life. Days drifted into a tenuous calm. The hunters, fulfilling their original intent, tracked deer and smaller game. The bear, invisible in the wilderness labyrinth, remained an unspoken concern. Everett found his thoughts frequently returning to Cassius, as though some invisible tether connected them. He wondered if the bullet shot in panic might have grazed the bear or left him unscathed but traumatized. Determined to ensure the bear's well-being, Everett used quiet hours to search for signs of Cassius. He scouted areas thick with raspberry bushes, places near the river where salmon swam. The forest, however, offered no fresh tracks or droppings. It seemed Cassius had taken care to avoid further human contact. Then one early morning, Everett stumbled upon fresh marks near a shallow stream. Bear prints, huge and unmistakable, skirted the water's edge. Broken branches and upturned stones hinted that a sizable creature had foraged here not long ago. A swirl of relief and apprehension stirred within him. Cassius still lived, at least well enough to rummage for fish. The question was, could coexistence be found, or had the entire episode sealed their fates as adversaries? Driven by a sense of responsibility, Everett made a decision. He spoke to the others, explaining he would break away from the group for a day or two to seek out a more personal resolution. Lyle and the others raised eyebrows but seemed to understand. Perhaps they too felt pangs of guilt over nearly killing an innocent animal out of fear. Perhaps they simply respected Everett's unique calling in the matter. Packing lightly, Everett left the main camp, heading north toward the deeper recesses of the forest. His heart pulsed with a mixture of dread and anticipation, but there was no turning back. The first day alone was eerily quiet. Everett moved carefully, scanning the ground and the foliage for any sign of Cassius. He kept his rifle slung across his back, but never once raised it in readiness. Instead, he carried a smaller firearm for self-defense just in case, and a canister of bear spray widely recommended by park rangers. He also packed a small offering, fresh salmon from a nearby creek, cleaned and prepared, which he hoped might serve as a goodwill gesture if fate allowed him to approach the bear again. It was a risky, perhaps naive plan, yet something inside him insisted it was the right thing to do. Late that afternoon, he came upon a narrow clearing dominated by a fallen cedar, its broad trunk bridging a shallow ravine. Moss grew thick on its bark, and the gentle trickle of water echoed in the distance. Scattered footprints along the ravine's edge revealed that Cassius might have used this natural bridge to cross more easily. With deliberation, Everett set the fish in an unthreatening open area near the trunk, retreated several yards, and settled behind a screen of ferns and young saplings. He wasn't sure if he would be fortunate enough to see Cassius. This was more about leaving a sign of peace. An hour passed. The forest remained tranquil, though a subtle tension laced the crisp air. As dusk approached and shadows lengthened across the ground, Everett sensed movement. Branches swayed with a careful, cautious step. Then he saw a massive shape at the far end of the clearing, nose testing the air. Cassius. The bear's muzzle lifted as he caught the scent of the salmon. Though bears are mostly solitary creatures, Cassius seemed to show a flicker of curiosity that overcame his instinct to remain hidden. Slowly he advanced, head swaying side to side, scanning for threats. Everett's heart pounded in his chest. He forced himself to remain still, to breathe deeply, channeling an aura of calm rather than fear. After all, animals often read the signals humans emit: a racing heart, panicked movements, or a threatening posture. Cassius was close enough now that Everett could see the bear's nostrils flare. He recognized the gift of salmon. Another rumble of caution emanated from Cassius's throat. His ears flattened, then rose again, uncertain. Finally, he edged forward, sniffed the fish, and devoured it with quick, powerful bites. The entire time, Everett felt a profound stillness seize him, as though the forest itself hushed in reverence for this precarious moment of trust. After finishing the meal, Cassius's gaze roamed the clearing. He seemed to sense Everett's presence. Their eyes met through the twilight gloom, forging a connection that felt ancient and unspoken. For a moment, time fell away. No rifles, no tensions, just two beings who shared the same ground and breathed the same air. Then, with surprising delicacy for such a huge creature, Cassius turned and lumbered away into the gathering dark. Night enveloped the woods, and Everett finally exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart felt thunderous, but also strangely exhilarated. He had given something back, a small offering, yet deeply meaningful in a world too often governed by fear and conflict. The next morning, Everett ventured deeper into the wilderness, scouting for more signs of Cassius. He came across a battered, hollow log that looked recently torn apart, perhaps in search of insects or grubs. Claw marks around the log's circumference resembled Cassius's, and the dampness of the shredded bark confirmed it had happened recently. As the day wore on, Everett spied Cassius once more in a meadow near the base of a waterfall. This time there was no carefully placed salmon. The bear, foraging amid tall grass, glanced over at Everett, who stood at a respectful distance. Neither approached the other, yet neither fled. Perhaps the silent truce was being nurtured by repeated exposure without violence. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the ridgelines, painting the sky with swirls of orange and purple, Everett returned to the campsite of his hunting companions. Upon hearing his story, Lyle and a few others stared in disbelief. "You fed a bear? Are you?" Ever since childhood, they'd been told not to feed bears, as it encourages dangerous familiarity. But Everett believed this situation was different, a singular opportunity for healing after their violent standoff. "I'm not trying to tame him," Everett explained quietly. "I just needed him to see that we aren't all threats. A single bullet shot changed everything between our species in this part of the forest. Maybe a single act of kindness can balance the scales, however slightly." During the subsequent days, the dynamic in the forest shifted palpably. The hunters finished their expedition for deer, abiding by strict measures to store food properly and minimize conflict with wildlife. There were no more close calls with Cassius. Eventually, the time came to break down the camp. Vehicles were loaded, fires extinguished, footprints erased as best they could. On that last morning, Everett rose early and hiked to a vantage point overlooking the meadow where he'd last spotted Cassius. For a while, he simply sat, absorbing the hush of dawn. Suddenly, his breath caught in his throat. On the far side of the meadow, Cassius ambled out of the tree line, nose lifted to the breeze. This time, the bear made no sound of warning. Standing, Everett felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He resisted the urge to approach both for his safety and to preserve Cassius's wild nature. Instead, he locked eyes with the great bear one final time and offered a nod of respect. With that silent farewell, Everett turned and walked away, leaving Cassius to claim the forest, as he always had. Months passed. Stories circulated. Local rangers in Glacier National Park heard rumors of a certain big bear frequenting the deeper areas, but no reports of aggressive behavior or menacing encounters. There was even a mention of a researcher who spotted an especially large black-brown bear fishing by the river, a bear that seemed to tolerate her presence at a cautious distance. Over time, Everett found himself reflecting on that encounter with a gentle ache of nostalgia. He had learned something invaluable, a lesson about fear, empathy, and the lines we draw between ourselves and the creatures that share our world. In the following summer, Everett volunteered with a local wildlife conservation effort, educating visitors about safe practices and respect for wildlife. Among his lessons, never feed a bear in ordinary circumstances to avoid teaching it to rely on humans. Yet, in hushed tones and private conversations, he sometimes recounted the extraordinary story of Cassius, a bear that had been cornered, nearly shot, yet found reason to let go of vengeance. He never shared the exact location or the time he had offered salmon to the giant. Some experiences are best preserved in the hush of personal memory, where they illuminate the soul without inviting intrusion. Visitors to Glacier National Park often asked about the rumored giant bear. The rangers, half amused and half intrigued, would share the usual safety guidelines: how to store food in bear-proof containers, how to use bear spray, and how to keep a respectful distance. A few who ventured deep into remote corners of the forest claimed they saw Cassius, a bear unlike any other, with an almost regal presence. Whispers circulated of a gentle giant, though no one dared to label a wild bear entirely gentle. Still, these glimpses fueled a legend that spread among campers and hikers who were in tune with nature's grandeur. In time, even Lyle softened. The memory of that day's near tragedy lingered, but also the knowledge that they had averted disaster shaped his perspective on hunting and the importance of boundaries. He and Everett sometimes shared campfires together, talking about the ephemeral boundary between life and death, how 1 second can define an entire future for human and beast alike. The intangible bond forged in the forest that day served as a reminder. Empathy is a force more potent than any rifle when it comes to forging lasting respect between species. As the years rolled by, Cassius became a symbol, an unofficial guardian of that wild territory. Few encountered him, and those who did never forgot the experience. His footprints became imprinted not just in the soil, but in the hearts of those who recognized that the bear's survival was part of a broader tapestry, a living testament to how fear and aggression can transform into coexistence, given compassion and understanding. Everett found quiet fulfillment in the knowledge that somewhere out there, Cassius roamed free, unburdened by the weight of that fateful day. During a particularly brutal winter, local conservationists found evidence that Cassius had survived by denning in an isolated cave. His tracks showed he emerged come spring, hungry but alive. Everett, who had joined a volunteer search party to monitor wildlife health post-winter, discovered a set of massive paw prints leading away from the mouth of an inaccessible gorge. Each imprint was an echo of a life that had almost been cut short yet had persevered. Standing at the edge of that gorge, the wind gusting around him, Everett closed his eyes and recalled every detail: the tense morning, the near-fatal shot, the decision to step forward with empathy instead of hostility. He realized that his own life had changed in parallel. Before, he hunted more out of tradition than necessity, relishing the camaraderie and the thrill. But that single event taught him the depth of respect and moral responsibility required to take another life. It wasn't a righteous condemnation of hunting as a whole. It was an awakening to the shared vulnerability that comes from living in a delicate ecosystem where every action, no matter how seemingly small, can ripple outward with tremendous impact. That shift in Everett's consciousness opened him to new opportunities, leading educational hikes, volunteering in wildlife rescue missions, and advocating for conservation efforts that balanced human and animal needs. It wasn't just Cassius who had been cornered and frightened. In many ways, Everett had been cornered by the weight of his own choices. Some nights, he dreamed of Cassius. In these dreams, the forest was illuminated by a strange, amber light, and the bear's dark form stood on a ridge overlooking a chasm. Everett would find himself on the opposite side, arms wide, with no weapon. The space between them hummed with tension, but there was no shot, no roar, no fear. Instead, a silent understanding bloomed, a promise of respect, a vow that neither would cross boundaries set by survival and dignity. Waking from such dreams, Everett felt a peculiar serenity. Perhaps it was his psyche weaving closure into the tapestry of that day. In the broader community, Everett shared the lesson with anyone who would listen, that illusions of dominance vanish when you look into the eyes of a being fighting for its life. Whether it's a cornered bear or a desperate human, fear can transform even the gentlest soul into a fierce creature. However, empathy can be a bridge, forging unexpected alliances. Some folks scoffed, claiming he was projecting human sentiment onto a wild animal. Others were intrigued, inspired by the possibility that the line between humanity and nature is not so harshly drawn as we think. One spring, a documentary crew arrived in the region, drawn by rumors of an unusually large bear whose sightings carried a near mystical reverence. They interviewed locals, rangers, and conservationists, hoping to capture footage that would highlight the importance of peaceful coexistence with wildlife. Though no one could guarantee an appearance by Cassius, the stories alone painted a powerful narrative. The crew eventually sought out Everett, having heard whispers of his remarkable encounter. At first, he was hesitant. He wanted to protect Cassius's privacy. But after careful consideration, he offered a reserved interview, focusing on the broader themes of respect and humility in the natural world. He spoke with passion about that day in the forest, the near tragedy, and the grace that followed. He never gave precise locations or details that might endanger Cassius, but his sincerity shone through every word. The documentary aired internationally. Though it lacked a direct sighting of Cassius, the story struck a chord in viewers. Messages poured in from people who were moved by the reflection that humans can choose to step out of violence's shadow. And if that choice could save a single bear's life, perhaps it could also ripple out to protect entire habitats, entire species, entire communities. Government officials began to expand educational campaigns on bear safety, encouraging hikers, campers, and hunters to learn strategies for preventing dangerous encounters. Over time, a subtle cultural shift took shape. More people started traveling responsibly, respecting wildlife closures, and understanding that preserving wilderness meant preserving the well-being of future generations. Meanwhile, Cassius's legend grew quietly, unaffected by human acclaim. He wandered the labyrinth of forests, meadows, and rocky slopes, living his life as a bear must, searching for food, finding mates, denning in the winter. Though sightings were fewer each year, they were often accompanied by reverence. Hikers would glimpse his towering form and remain still, letting him pass. As if by instinct, Cassius rarely showed hostility unless threatened. In a realm often torn by conflict, the bear's existence hinted at a more balanced path. Observers who spotted him up close reported a feeling of awe that transcended fear. He was a living reminder of a pivotal moment when a single act could either fracture or heal the fragile bond between species. Everett, for his part, continued guiding volunteer groups in the park. He trained them in leave, no-trace principles, explained how to read animal signs, and insisted that respect was not just a courtesy, it was essential to survival for both humans and wildlife. When novices asked him about the biggest threat in the wilderness, he often replied, "It's the fear we carry in our own hearts." They rarely understood at first, but the lessons sank in over time. The forest is an ecosystem built on intricate relationships, where every being has a role. Fear, left unchecked, can corrode the delicate threads that keep everything in balance. Years later, on a crisp autumn evening, Everett hiked alone to the bluff that overlooked the valley where he and Cassius had once faced each other. The wind carried a faint tang of pine resin and decaying leaves. Autumn's fiery palette draped the mountainsides in reds and golds. Looking down into the valley, Everett closed his eyes. He wasn't sure if Cassius was still alive. Bears in that region often lived 20 years or more, yet mortality was part of the cycle. He hoped the old bear still prowled these ridges, forging his path with unbroken dignity. Whether or not they crossed paths again mattered less than the truth they had already shared. He let his gaze wander across the rugged skyline. Memories surfaced, unbidden, of that menacing roar, the thunderous heartbeat in his chest, the shot that nearly ignited a nightmare. Yet the memory that glowed brightest was that fleeting trust, the moment Cassius accepted the salmon and later locked eyes with Everett in the meadow. A peace offering in the face of primal fear. It was enough to make a man believe that even in a world marred by conflict and misunderstanding, there were moments of genuine connection that transcended words and reason. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the undergrowth behind Everett. He turned slowly, expecting perhaps a deer or a smaller creature. Nothing appeared. Still, his heartbeat quickened, overshadowed by a gentle, inexplicable sense of warmth in his chest. He found himself half hoping, half believing that Cassius, or another bear like him, might be near. Perhaps he was only hearing the forest breathe, or perhaps it was a silent reminder that though life is ephemeral, the possibilities for compassion echo through every branch and leaf. Every footstep on mossy ground. He stayed there, watching the sun dip behind the mountain peaks, casting long rays across the sky in a blaze of orange and pink. Clouds, gilded with fiery highlights, floated across the horizon like drifting memories of everything that had transpired. The hush of evening settled, a timeless hush that had enveloped this land long before humans ventured here. And in that hush, Everett felt a sense of belonging to the cycles of birth, struggle, survival, and renewal that defined the wilderness. He had come to this place once as a hunter, cornering a frightened bear. He left now as something else, a guardian perhaps, or a witness, forever changed by a single choice. From that day forward, whenever Everett recounted the story, he emphasized not the terror, but the turning point, the moment empathy overrode violence. He could never say what went through Cassius's mind, if mind was even the right word, but he was certain the bear recognized some form of mercy, or at least realized that not every human wants to destroy what it fears. Standing at that bluff, Everett quietly whispered his gratitude to Cassius and to the primal power that had guided them both to peace instead of carnage. In time, the tale of the frightened bear, cornered by hunters, would become a vivid legend. Stories sometimes grow bigger than reality, but at its core was this simple truth: sometimes the best shot is the one never taken. The forest can heal if given a chance, forging bonds stronger than steel. And for as long as Cassius roamed, for as long as the memory of that day lingered in the hearts of those who heard it, a flicker of hope burned against the darkness of fear, illuminating a path of respect, connection, and personal growth. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Montana's wild forests and into the heart of an unforgettable encounter between man and bear. This story of Cassius and Everett shows us the profound impact of a single moment, how mercy can triumph over fear, how empathy can transform enemies into silent allies, and how each choice we make reshapes our bond with nature. If their story has stirred something in you, please consider sharing it so others might reflect on the power of compassion when facing the unknown. By liking and subscribing, you'll help our community grow and keep these important messages alive. Your support allows us to continue exploring and sharing stories that highlight the resilience of nature and the human spirit. Let's stand together in protecting what we love and respect the world around us, even the mighty bears that roam our mountains.